Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. This is the Innovate in MedTech podcast, a show for MedTech and life sciences professionals that aims to help you get ahead in your career. I'm your host, Tara Sharma, ex-MedTech professional turned executive search headhunter and owner of recruitment agency Innovate Search for the MedTech, pharma and biotech industries with over 20 years of experience in the healthcare field. For more tips and tricks on how to get ahead in your career, follow me on LinkedIn. Let's dive into this week's episode. Hello. I'm going to shout. Hi everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I'm so glad everyone managed to arrive and have a little bit of a mingle and catch up before we get started. So I know all of you, but some of you are a little bit newer to the group. So I'm Tara, Managing Director and founder of Innovate Search. We're a specialist search firm for the life sciences sector, but separately to that, I'm founder of MedExec, and a lot of you in this room have been part of the MedExec community for the last, it's more than 6 months. I think it's 9 months now, isn't it, since last year. So interestingly, every month we meet virtually and we discuss things that are challenges that we've had with the business for the last month. What's kind of blocking us, what are we trying to work on, and every single time, no surprises, AI comes up as a topic. Our launch event was about looking into the future with AI and what should we be thinking about as executives, and this time round we thought, right, I think it's time to all come together again and let's recalibrate and see where we're at, and we've been very lucky to secure Mark to come and talk to you all today about AI and what levers can we be pulling, and any questions you want to ask, go for it. What we have done this time, because we know it's going to be such a good topic and a few people couldn't come, we have got the lovely Ronnie recording everything for us today. So I've left a little card on your table. Please feel free to write somebody's name on there and whoever it is that you'd like us to send this recording to. I know a few people wanted us to send it to someone in their team, or you might have another peer that you work with that you think would get value out of the day, and we'll send only to them and they'll know that it came from you. Other than that, it's just going to be in the school portal, so only anyone that's in the MedExec community. So if anyone's here tonight that isn't in the community and like to join, you're more than welcome to talk to us about that. Before I let Mark introduce himself, I'll just quickly let you know the team are here, so if you need anything, just let them know. Michelle, who's our head of commercial, Neve at the back, who's organizer extraordinaire, she'll help you, and Isaac out there. So if you need anything, don't ask me. And what I will do, I'm going to hand over to you.
Sure.
Whereabouts
in Wellington are you from? Whereabouts in Wellington are you?
No.
So you just flew in from there? Oh, yeah,
are you from Wellington?
I am from Wellington. Yeah.
Florida.
Well, yeah. I picked that.
I didn't pick
that
the accent.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that Wellington accent.
Okay, hey, thanks everyone. Really good to get a sense of who's in the room tonight, and hopefully we can have some conversation about what AI is and where it's heading and all the different things that go along with it, because it's a really big topic, as we all know, with lots of different threads to pull on, and hopefully we can sort of pull together a bit of a narrative that makes sense. Before we do that, I'll just give you a little bit of background about me. There's a lot of things there. So I do a lot of advising stuff. I sit on a bunch of sort of task force and do advisory inside government. I teach digital transformation and AI transformation at Deakin University, and have invested in a bunch of startups and those kinds of things. Also, I'm on the board of YMCA Victoria. The reason I tell you that is because it's one of the largest YMCA associations in the world, and because of that, I've become the special advisor in AI for YMCA globally, and doing a lot around, sort of thinking about AI across a very, very large kind of part, emerging economies, and how does it impact young people and those kinds of things. Since I've done this slide, there's probably a few other things, and occasionally I get some sleep. But yeah, there's a lot I do, and as you can see, I kind of live and breathe this AI stuff, and I have been doing it for a long time. One thing that I'd say is I've also been in the tech advisory space for a long time. I sort of started in sort of technology strategy and digital strategy in the 90s in Wellington. And through that process, I became the digital strategy columnist for BRW, and I've written for Forbes and so on. I'm only just telling you things because I'll reference some of this stuff later on because it's will have some relevance. And these are kind of the clients and the types of things that I work with. So context. Best way to talk about AI is to talk about context, because if we start talking about the technology, we get lost very, very quickly. And the best way to talk about context, I think, is to think about what's our operating environment. First thing we need to know, okay, when it comes to AI, is most organizations are not getting it right by any stretch of the imagination. There are roughly 5% of organizations who are getting huge return on investment from their AI spend. Like huge return. Like really, really, really big productivity gains, huge revenue growth. Actually, more often than not, their staff numbers are growing, not shrinking. Then you've got organizations at the bottom who are spending huge amounts of money and are getting almost no return on investment. And then you get some people in the middle who are spending money, they're getting stuff, and they're seeing pockets of productivity improvement. Hey mate, how are you? Sorry. No worries. But it's not universal. So the kind of overarching theme for tonight will be, what is the 5% doing that everybody else is not doing? What are the patterns emerging? And how can we set ourselves up to be kind of part of that 5%? And the reason why that's important is because what's happening with AI and what AI will be doing to whole markets is exactly what happened in the early stages of sort of like the digital transformation stage with search and social media and so on, way back before around about the global financial crisis time, where we saw that there was, areas like media and online retail and so on, we saw that there was a couple of businesses that ended up controlling kind of everything, and everybody else being pushed down to the bottom and basically fighting over price. And the middle of those markets basically got hollowed out. Now that was a few areas of the economy. What AI is doing is it's kind of doing it to everything at once. So I think it's really important to understand how that's going to work and why that 5% are actually headed to putting themselves in the position where they're going to control huge amounts of market power, and then to think about what that means for your organisation and your sort of approach to leadership. The other point is to think about it in context of Australia, because I think that's important. Now we can think about more broadly, but I think just the fact that we work here, I think it's important to understand like the Australian context. Does anybody know what the Economic Complexity Index is? Comes out of Harvard Kennedy School of Business, and it's a measurement of how complex a nation's economy is. In business, we normally, when we say complex, that's bad, yeah? So more complex is bad. But when we're talking about a nation's economy, a more complex economy is good. The reason for that is that all the different layers of the economy work together more effectively. Wealth is captured and moved through the economy really effectively. And a more complex economy is actually more robust. So when if it goes through an economic shock, it's able to recover and shift and change more effectively than an economy that's lower in complexity. Where do you think Australia sits on the Global Economic Complexity Index? So let's go hands. Near the top, middle, bottom. Cool. What? Low. Yeah. And just for context, so we're number 12, so really, really wealthy nation. Number 12 in terms of GDP, number 16 in terms of exports, 9 GDP per capita. So super, super wealthy. But when it comes to economic complexity, we're super low. Super, super, super low. We're the lowest westernised or developed economy on the index. Now, why is that? And we've fallen 42 places in the last 30 years. Anybody got a sense of why that may be?
We've got a few big things.
What?
A few big industries.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely part of it. Yeah. So we've got mining. But what's happened in the last 30 years? So what's happened in the last 30 years is the global economy has fundamentally shifted and gone through some really significant shocks. So we've seen dot-com boom and bust. We saw the global financial crisis. We saw like really big investments in new sort of technologies that that fundamentally changed the way the world works, like search and social media and so on. And we have also seen we've had COVID. Now, while all of that was going on, exactly as you say, Australia's economy was doing pretty well comparatively to the rest of the world. Like, we're lucky, yeah? So, because the rest of the world was going through really significant pain, and Australia's economy was able to weather that storm quite well because we had a mining boom going on, we had really robust trade with China, all of those kinds of things were happening. We had obviously a boom in the housing market, and as a result, as I said, we were able to weather that storm. What that means, though, is when we think about incentives, there's been no incentive to take risk. When everything's going well, as we know, stay as we are. Just take no risk. So what that means is we have a leadership class, particularly political leadership class, that has spent their entire careers being in an environment where the main focus was do nothing. Now, this is no criticism of Australia. I'm not saying it like it's a bad thing, because we are incredibly lucky to have that wealth. But what I am saying is understand that as an operating environment. Understand that when we think about AI and you go to conferences and you go talk about it and you talk about innovation and technology, it's through that lens of risk and governance, risk and governance, risk and governance. When your staff go think about it, it's through, when we read about it in the media in Australia in particular, there's very much a focus on how do we slow this down. And I mean, the thing about economic complexity, as I said, it's really just a way of indicating how well a nation, how well risk is actually happening throughout the economy. When people are taking risks and they're able to understand what's going on and they're able to invest in those and get value from it, then that usually translates into economic momentum. And what's been going on, as I said, is that we just haven't had that need in Australia for quite some time. Now, what that means is we've got this sort of economic complexity gap emerging, and that's created leadership risk aversion. Again, not a criticism, it's just the environment we're in. One of the things that is interesting about that, particularly as it comes to technology investment, is one of the best times to win a race is when nobody else has turned up to the starting line. And I think there is an opportunity, definitely, for a lot of organisations in this part of the world to actually move faster, but through a really deeply strategic lens about what that means, and actually dominate parts of the market. Now, the other point around this is that it's actually showing up in other numbers as well. So when we look at AI adoption, so enterprise AI adoption globally, now this was at the end of last year, so it's much higher now, that US was about 78%. Australia wasn't too far behind, so roughly 60%. But Australia's productivity gain was one of the lowest in the world, less than 1%. So quite often when I do these talks, people ask me to come in and say, can you tell us what other people in Australia are doing and what's happening? And I say, don't look there, because they're not doing it right. Like, if you want to be looking at how to actually get it right, you need to look a little bit further afield. And the reason why this is fundamentally AI is, at its core, not really a technology thing at all. Even though the technology is moving really, really fast, even though there is huge investment going into the different technology layers, getting value from it as an organisation is really not a technology thing. There's fundamentally a leadership choice and a leadership challenge. And I'll explain that more in just a second. But what I will do is talk a little bit now about what some of the leaders are doing when it comes to AI that's preventing them. So the ones in that kind of bottom 60%, but what are they doing and what are the patterns emerging there that's actually preventing them getting value? And it usually starts because somebody has read an article, something like this. So Harvard Business Review, somebody's read, generative AI can improve skilled workers' performance by nearly 40% compared to workers who don't use it, or something like that, or automate something, reduce cost, headcount, blah, 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 blah. Pressure happens inside the organisation. Somebody reads the headline, goes, believes the headline, and says, we want that for our organisation. Somebody, it's your responsibility, go and do it. And so quite often that then leads a set of behaviours which creates kind of traps or ways that people get stuck. So one of them is the perception of being and doing things faster. And a lot of that this is more kind of like an organisation, so people level, but the leaders are kind of measuring how people are feeling about AI and what it means. And so what ends up happening, and I've seen this with some organisations we're dealing with right now, where they rolling out the tools and the capability and a bit of training, and people are learning them, but they're going through that learning curve, and they're going, well, how much more productive do you feel? They go, oh, super, doing way more stuff. But when you actually sit back and look at the outcomes and the impact, it's actually going down. And so what's going on there is that they're measuring whether or not, they're measuring the wrong thing. They're measuring the real impact, and even understanding about how to measure the real impact. The other point around that is that kind of with that rollout where you sort of roll out the technology to everybody and not provide any guidance and everybody's sort of going on their own journey, one of the things that can happen very, very quickly is you kind of get Dunning-Kruger happening at scale, where all of a sudden everybody in the organisation feels like, well, I'm now a data scientist, where I can now know to do this and I can do this, and all of a sudden they are coming up with ways of doing things. Now you put that in front of an expert and they go, well, it's complete nonsense, but they feel like it's good. And what that actually says, which is the interesting little piece around that, is that expertise is actually more valuable now than it ever has been. While we're thinking about AI going to be able to replace expertise and it's going to replace knowledge work, etc., etc., the real thing about AI, to arrest these kinds of numbers, to be really good at using it, you have to ask a really intelligent question, and you have to have enough depth and understanding to be able to understand what the output looks like. And at the moment, there's a lot of that kind of not really happening, or not really appreciating what that depth of expertise actually means. The other piece is the efficiency trap. Now this is kind of everywhere. So and the technology firms, particularly some of the bigger firms who are taking the models and building it into their software and so on, they haven't done themselves a lot of sort of favours, because they have focused really, really heavily on selling the efficiency message. They're basically going out there saying AI is going to help you replace stuff. It's going to look at a workflow, look at a process, and it's going to help it do it. And so it's all this automation. Talking about how you can replace people and can do this stuff. It's going to make you way more efficient. But the problem with that is it's fundamentally, the framing is, how do we do what we've always done, but slightly faster and cheaper? That's the starting point. And if your working hypothesis is that the world that we're in is going to be increasingly dynamic from a macroeconomic, geopolitical and technological standpoint, doing what we've always done but faster and cheaper is kind of like being a puddle in the sunlight. It's just slow evaporation. That's really all it is. The other part around it, and I know this has happened because I've seen it, there's been some organisations, let's say maybe a bank, that has, which has sort of rolled out AI tools to all the staff. They've, we're all going to go full AI. We're going to go AI native, and then we're now going to roll out KPIs, and the KPIs are all focused around efficiency. And what ends up happening? Well, let's think about most kind of processes inside a corporate environment are a variation of identify a problem, do some kind of research, synthesize that research, write some kind of report of some description, and then present that for a decision, roughly, yeah? Like most, that's roughly what happens, different formats. But of course, if everybody is being incentivized through the lens of efficiency, then the person identifying the problem uses AI to identify the problem. The person doing the research does AI to do the research. The person doing the synthesis and the kind of understanding uses AI to do that. The person writing the report uses AI to write the report. The person reviewing the report and producing it for a decision uses AI to do that. And even the person making the decision uses AI to do that. And so what ends up happening is you get whole value chains creating lots and lots of stuff that nobody understands. Literally nobody understands what's going on. Now that might be all right once or twice, but you do that across a whole team over and over and over again. What ends up happening is your business is spitting out lots of outputs that have zero impact. Like literally no impact. You're becoming efficiently irrelevant to the market. Now what's the other view of that? What's the different way of thinking about that? It's thinking about through a learning focus. Like how are we learning? How are our people working with these tools in a way that's compounding the learning? The speed is there, you'll get the value, but the way you measure and the way you think about that starts to shift really, really quickly. So the KPIs are much more focused around impact. So the simple question there is, do you want to produce 100 outputs that have virtually no impact, or do you want to produce one output that fundamentally changes the way your business works? It's a no-brainer, really. But what that does mean is you have to redesign the process. And then it's really sort of thinking about how you're measuring new value and thinking about how people work, so ways of working that are fundamentally designed to improve critical thought and creativity, not erode it. And the other thing about efficiency is it's fundamentally all it is subtraction. That's all it is. You can't drop below zero. And the other point around efficiency in AI is that everybody else has got access to exactly the same tools. As soon as they buy and they implement the same thing, your competitive advantage shrinks to zero immediately. Literally overnight, that can happen. So that's why I say you can be really, really, really efficient and you're still losing. And the other one, and this sort of usually happens with technology leaders quite often, where they've been told, it's your responsibility, go out and do this. They haven't quite got the sense of what it means strategically, and what they do is they get the pressure to adopt AI and roll it through the organisation. So the first thing they do is sort of centralise it and control it. Now what the impact of that is that the people, the culture of the organisation sort of starts to hold things to themselves. The change starts to become much more competitive, and sort of experimentation broadly slows down. And then as a result, teams stop trying, they stop communicating, and that gap starts to widen. You're basically creating a feedback loop, but not one that you want. And then one of the last traps, I think, is kind of the wait and see trap. And that's quite prevalent in Australia, which is, we're going to be a fast follower. Let's sort of wait for best practice to emerge, and then we can sort of copy what's going on. But as we know, AI is developing incredibly, incredibly fast. There's updates to the models getting faster and faster and faster. There's updates to the actual systems almost on a daily basis now. So kind of waiting for trying to work out what the best model is kind of dropping behind quite quickly. I think the truth is, if you actually think about it through a leader's lens and the organisation kind of and all your people's lens, as a leader, what you're actually doing when you're thinking about AI, yes, you build AI systems and so on, but fundamentally you're asking your people to rethink how they work, how they collaborate, rethink how knowledge is collected, rethink the value that's generated through separate processes, so having to redesign processes, and ultimately they're going to have to rethink the nature of work itself. And so you kind of need to make that about your culture. I remember having that conversation that's kind of very similar conversation with somebody again, and I won't say who the organisation is, but you've all shopped there. And we're having that same conversation. We're talking about what AI was going to do to the organisation, how it was going to change the way that people work, and we're talking all this really interesting future stuff. And they said, well, have you got an example of an organisation like ours that have gone through and done this transformation? And I sort of laughed. And they went, why? Why are you laughing? And I said, well, I've just told you that this is fundamentally about how your people work and about how your culture is going to form. And your first question is, how has somebody else done it? Like, if your starting point is, how do I copy somebody else's culture? Like, you're not going to get anywhere. And the problem with this is because fundamentally what I'm seeing is the pattern is people are taking a deterministic mindset and applying it to a probabilistic technology. What do I mean by that? So every bit of software that we've ever used is deterministic. Okay, so think about it like a sausage factory for data. Data goes in, process, answer comes out. Same query goes in, same data goes in, same process, same thing comes out. Really, really predictable. AI is exactly not that. Exactly not that. It's fundamentally, you put a query in, you get an answer. You put the same query in, you're going to get a completely different answer. Different people put different queries in, they get very different answers. The mere fact that so if you're using ChatGPT or Claude or something and you ask it to do something and it gets an answer, and then you ask it the same thing twice, the mere fact that you're asking it the same query twice makes it think, oh, the user is asking me the same question again, the probability is they need a different answer. So that's why I sort of say, it's sort of like bringing a knife to a gunfight. You just sort of like, you're kind of not really sort of framing it in the right way. The thing about probabilities, of course, is it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. Like if we harness that technology, we harness that power, that's really like, yes, we want things to be predictable in business, but we also want to know what are all the variables? What could happen? And no other technology has been able to help us think through those variables of what could happen in any way before. But AI can eat that stuff up for breakfast. Now, if we start thinking about what organisations are doing to shape that up, like Moderna is one organisation that was been going through that phase, and one of the things, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the one thing that they were doing is they're essentially merging HR and IT into one function, and for two reasons. Firstly, because everybody is going to be using this technology on an ongoing basis, and it's going to fundamentally change the way they work, so they kind of needed an overarching view of the people in the tech coming together. And the other point is the technology is starting to operate more like people. So we need to start thinking about it more like, how do we think about this technology through the lens of human capital? What is the capacity that we need to add to the organisation to help us do what we need to do? And that little insight is one of the things that I find when we're looking at the sort of academic research around AI adoption and what organisations are doing differently. That little insight tends to be one of the things, the starting points, that organisations getting this really, really right tend to do. What they do is they say, what are we here to do as an organisation? And what are all the things that we would like to do to execute on our mission and our strategy that we haven't been able to do because of resource constraints? Now let's think in an unconstrained way, because AI gives us the opportunity to do that. So what are the 5% doing? So what we know is the top performers, okay, when it comes, so that 5%, it's almost like 7 times the financial return of their peers. And it's not because they're spending more, it's not because they're spending more on the tech, it's because they're moving in a different way. And the thing they're doing, almost universally, is they're focusing on their people and how their people are adopting and understanding the technology. The thing that I like to talk about is a sort of like a little way of thinking about it is mindset, skill set, tool set. Start with the mindset, help the organisation understand what this technology is and how it's going to impact the ways of working and where the organisation is heading. Then the skills, non-technical skills most of the time. The thing about being really good at using AI is that things like collaboration, like leadership, like creativity, those skills actually make you really, really good at using AI. Thinking in a non-linear way. Those skills make you really, really good at using it. The technology skills, AI just eats those things up. You don't really need to be super, super good at those things. And then finally, how do we apply that to our tool set of choice? Rather than what has normally happened with technology waves, which is start with buying the technology, push it out, get everybody changing by training them up on technically how to use it, and then hopefully that works. Universally, that does not work. Mayo Clinic is a really good example of an organisation who went through that process really, really well. It was about almost 2 years ago where they sort of started on their journey around this, and obviously, regulated environment, like staff of, sort of lots of PhD researchers, lots of, sensitive data like patient data, lots of data, lots of really valuable data, of course, because they're working on, commercializing IP, etc. And, kind of the whole environment, we'd expect them to be really, really sort of like overbearing when it came to governance and control. Instead, they didn't do any of that. They actually said, we've got ethics, we've got our cost controls, we've got our risk, all of those governance elements are there. We don't need to create new layers of no because of the technology. So they just sort of built it into the governance frameworks that they had. And then the thing that I think was kind of really brilliant about what they did is when it came to the actual tech itself, they said to the organisation, you know what, we don't know. We don't know what AI is going to do. We don't know where it's going to go. We don't know what the use cases are. We don't know how you're going to use it. But what we do know is that if you get good at using it, our staff, you are going to be better, and you're going to be able to do more of what you're here to do, which is do great research, discover new science, and save lives. So they just tied it directly back to their mission, not how do we do what you're currently doing but slightly cheaper. It was fundamentally, we are here to do great research, discover new science, and save lives. How do we do more of that with this technology and increase our impact on the world? About a year later, they were about 45% productivity improvement kind of across the board. Revenue, they'd had like the first wave of kind of revenue come out of that was about $500 million or so. Initially, now it's way, way, way higher. And their staff numbers had grown by about 12%. Now, not everybody made it, some, obviously when there's change, some people just go, no, I'm not up for it, and they leave and all that kind of normal shift and change. But that approach of actually saying, this is fundamentally about you, our people, that was the thing that unlocked the value. And that, again, shows up in the numbers when you start looking at even really, this bit of research came out just a couple of weeks ago, so it's come from the World Economic Forum, and looking at, again, what are the organisations doing the best doing. And what they're showing is that, huge amount of spend on AI broadly, only a small number are actually even thinking about it from a transformative perspective, and the ones that are starting to unpack not just how do we apply it and what is the use case and how do we get short-term advantage, but how do we organise ourselves around this to be able to unlock the advantage. And so they're talking about kind of intelligence engines. I think that's a really important piece. I say that a lot when I'm working with organisations. It goes, what does your organisation look like when you have intelligence, both artificial and human, at the core of the business? What does that actually look like? The tech stack, it's got to shift and change because it's going to have to change, so it needs to be adaptive. You need to start redesigning operations and ways of working, and the framing is never AI versus, it's never technology versus people, it's technology and people. And then the main point around it, it's always aiming at new value creation. Another example here of an organisation that had been doing that kind of approach, and that human first approach. And I think that the really piece here is that what they're saying is the fundamental piece is we're not trying to replace people, we're trying to amplify the impact that they have. And we heard, you heard the term kind of human in the loop when it comes to AI. This has been talked about a lot. We've got to create human in the loop. I hate that term. I really, really do, because it immediately sounds like we're handing over agency to a technology. I prefer human in the lead. We are the ones controlling this. We are the ones directing where this power is going. We are the ones thinking about how this gets implemented. Yeah, we've got to check its work, and we've got to think about what it does, but it's us directing it. Another way of thinking about that is, there's a guy called Rick Rubin. Has anybody heard of him? Music producer? Yep, cool. So, music producer. He produced Beastie Boys and Red Hot Chili Peppers and Dr. Dre and things like that. He's sort of, big white hair and huge white beard. He's a big creative guy, crazy looking guy. And he's currently doing work with Anthropic. And about a year ago, he put out a little short video, which I absolutely loved, and I use it a lot, where he said, we're creating these incredible machines that are able to take inhuman amounts of data, process it, turn it into logic, sort through that logic, and then reason through it to be able to produce interesting insights and outputs. But what these machines are incredibly poor at is what humans are great at, which is being deeply unreasonable. And I love that term, but what he meant, and the way he said, what he meant, which is AI tools are essentially historical. That's what they are. They're taking historical information and looking for patterns and then trying to present that back in a new way. But stepping into the unknown, so stepping into the place where innovation happens, where creativity happens, like the new, what are we going to do next? That's essentially illogical. That's essentially something that an AI tool really doesn't know how to do. Well, maybe not yet, maybe at some point it might, but at the moment it definitely doesn't know how to do it. So, and it's essentially an unreasonable thing to do. But we're really good at that. We're really good at going, this doesn't exist, damn it, we're going to do it anyway, because we know it's going to be valued. AI can take, once we start moving in that direction, AI can take it and standardize it and productionize it really quickly and help us extract value from it really quickly. But the people need to be able to be moving in that new direction. And so when we're talking about redesigning an organisation, redesigning your operating model, that's what you need to start thinking about. What is the role of people to drive and keep moving in this new direction? And what is the role of AI and the technology or this other form of intelligence? How do they work together? And the more, because we were talking about this as we sat down earlier, but the thing about, I believe anyway, the thing about technology, I've been in the technology space for a long time, and I just don't find technology interesting. Like no technology is ever really that interesting in and of itself. It only becomes interesting when it enables people to solve new problems and do new things. It's the only time it becomes interesting. Yeah, you have big waves and people talk about values and all these kinds of things, but it's only interesting when it enables us to move forward in some way. So what is that mindset? So the mindset piece of going, well, if that is true, and if our people are constantly working on new and more difficult problems, and that's driving value in the organisation, and that value is starting to compound because we've got AI there, and compounding value leads to enterprise value, well then, what do we need to do? What is that mindset shift that we need to have inside the organisation? The easiest way, the most simplest way to put that is just not automation, it's augmentation. It's as I said before, AI and people coming together to create new value, not versus. It's not AI is going to replace this job or blah, 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 blah. It's fundamentally how do we redesign work so people and technology are coming together to produce increased impact. And the old mental model is just this productivity tool, it's going to replace human judgment, blah, blah. Essentially, we're painting this future where humans don't participate. Like, what kind of life is that? An AI mindset is, okay, this is my thinking partner. This is going to help me develop. This is going to help the organisation develop and understand more deeply. AI fluency is not the responsibility of the IT, of CIO. It's the responsibility of everybody. And we start thinking about the organisation kind of as an organic system. And when I say organic system, what I mean is like a human or a society or a bee's nest or whatever else it may be. But an organic system, it senses what's going on around it. It reasons and says, okay, what do I do with that information? It then acts in some way, and then it learns from that action. And then you create this feedback loop of evolution going on. That's fundamentally how we learn to walk and talk and everything else. And the other thing is just step into the fact that no process was designed. Oh God, there was no process really designed, were they? They were sort of like evolved, and they went from being, this is a bit of something we have to do to be compliant, to just adding and adding and adding and adding and adding and adding over time. But no process was ever set up to make use of this technology. It just doesn't exist. So the question really isn't how do we add AI to the process? It's is it even relevant in today's environment? What's the skill set? Well, I'm not going to talk about prompting and all that blah, blah, blah. But look, there's actually only one skill that I think is important. And that one skill is metacognition. That one skill is thinking about the way you think. If you can get really, really good at that and understand how you can use AI to help you think more effectively as a person or as an organisation, then change happens really, really quickly. We know that the highest performers, the people who are using AI in the most effective way, that's what they do. They are thinking, they're constantly... Now, what's an example of that? Okay, so we know that AI's got bias in it. The AI system's got bias because it comes from human data and humans are biased, and therefore, the bias is there. But because the frontier labs have been doing so much work in helping the AI systems understand, recognise and mitigate that bias, they've become bias recognition machines. So if you happen to be using Claude or ChatGPT or whatever else, or anybody in your firm is using these tools to work on a problem initially, well, at any point you can just stop and say, based on everything you know about me, where do you think my unconscious biases might be impacting the way I'm thinking about this problem? And it will go into psychology mode and go, well, here's all your blind spots. Which one do you want to start exploring? Now, it might not be perfect, but it's giving you a viewpoint that you've never had. And it's giving you information, essentially, that was out of reach a few years ago. So when I say this, and when I work with organisations on this, I just go, look, this really isn't about your job. This is fundamentally about your mind. If you get good at using this tool, it's going to develop critical thought, it's going to develop the ways, it's going to develop your creativity and so on. But again, if you just focus on output, 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 your creativity, your critical thought, your ways, it's just going to get eroded. It's a tool, and it can be used in a good way and a bad way. Every hammer ever made could build a house or kill your neighbour. It depends on how you swing it. And the point around it is, if we swing this tool in a bad way, it can actually produce really poor outcomes. The only difference with this and a hammer is, of course, this is the first time that the hammer's actually be able to swing itself. So, and there's a bit of something about that. Now, look, I've been talking theory and blah, 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 and this is kind of what's going on. I think the way to kind of bring this home a bit is if I tell you a story about what I do with my kids and about what that mindset piece can actually look like in practice. So I've got two boys, 12 and 8, or almost 13 and 8, and like a lot of kids their age, they play a huge amount of Minecraft. And I had, and that can annoy me sometimes because I don't want to hang out with my kids. And about a year or so ago, I heard my eldest son talking to one of his friends, and he was talking about AI and what it means, and it was this really negative lens that you heard in the media, you know. So, well, why should we bother learning a thing that AI is going to do all the work for us in the future, and it's going to take away our options, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All this sort of, negativity. And I was like, man, we've got to do something about this. So one day, shortly after that, when I was really bored at looking at the back of my kids' iPads, I said, hey kids, put them down. We are going to do something together. And of course they started moaning, oh no, we want to play games, and moaning. And I said, no, it's all right. What we're going to do is we're going to create a game. They said, what do you mean? I said, tell me about a game that you would like to have that you currently don't have. And they got super, super, super creative. Like really, really creative, like really, really amped up really immediately, and started talking about like, oh my God, it'd be really cool if we had this game that was like set inside like a ball pit, like an indoor ball pit, but it's like haunted, and there's like spooky noises and just all this sort of stuff going on. And just like, they started going off and getting really, really, creative. And I recorded that whole conversation, and then I transcribed it. And then I dropped it into, at that point, ChatGPT, and I said, I want you to turn this into first of all, a technical spec, like a game spec, and then a game developer document, which I only know is a thing because my sister works at a gaming company. And then we used some sort of like image tools and so on. And within the space of an afternoon, we went from them having roughly a brain fart, essentially, to kind of having a working prototype of that game, roughly. And then I said, now I want you to sort of draw little characters. And so they drew some little characters, and then we used some other tools to start turning those into 3D models that we could start dropping into the game. And then my youngest son said, oh my God, I really want to create a whole level. So I drew this, and then that turned into a whole level that we could drop into the game. And look, the reason I tell you this, apart from the fact I'm really proud of my kids, is the fact that the thing that I hoped would happen, happened. Where my eldest son said to me, Dad, does that mean anything I can imagine, I can create? He went from going, I am scared and I don't understand this and I'm terrified of this technology, to my whole world has opened up and I can now build anything I can imagine. Now what's going on there? Like that, all of a sudden that unlock of value was just happening immediately. I can build something, I can come up with it, I can find a solution. Like there's nothing holding me back trying to break through this new thing. Shortly after that, probably a few months after that, my wife bought a dog, half dog, it's a Chihuahua, like, and my oldest son said to me, hey, it'd be really cool if we had an app on our iPhone where we could like just talk to Siri and it could like direct us to where the closest dog walk is and all that kind of stuff. Now you can get those apps anywhere, but I said, well, let's build it. And so we just spent the afternoon talking to different AI tools and going through this process, and by the following day, we had it was actually took a while to get accepted, but the following day, my 11-year-old son at that time had his first app up on the iPhone store. And the thing about that is we didn't even put it out to the public. It was only available for 4 people, my family. Because what's gone on there? Because previously, building an app like this a few years ago would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. This was an afternoon of fun between a dad and his son, and $7 of AI credits. So now it's going to cost a little bit more than that now, but still. It was really, really super cheap. And it's kind of, it's this idea of we can build this software and use it and understand it and manipulate data and then just throw it away if we don't need it anymore. Or it can be just for a small team. We don't have to make it such a big investment that it needs to be for everybody. It's a really different way of thinking about software. And the other point I say around that is that the person in your organisation has spotted a process or a thing that is broken, that needs to be fixed, and probably come up with an idea about how to fix it, and yet most of the time nothing happens because getting the political will and building the business case and trying to find the money and blah, blah, blah is hard. But just going, I'm going to find a way to just come up with a little prototype and show somebody what good looks like. Now, it wouldn't be perfect and it wouldn't solve the problem, and it's not enterprise grade and security, but you could show somebody what the solution looks like. That's a huge value unlock. The other point around that is it's also thinking differently about work, because knowledge work most of the time used to start and end with building a Word doc or a PowerPoint doc or an Excel doc of some sort, but now we can create apps, and none of that is necessary anymore. We don't have to be constrained to that mindset. And what does changing thinking mean when I say changing thinking? So changing the way that we think. Again, the only way I can tell that is I can tell it through personal stories. And I'll tell you 3 things that I do. So I told you before that I wrote a lot of articles, and I've written hundreds of articles, and I still do. But I don't use AI to write the article for me. What I do is I put my headphones on, and I say, I want you to act as a journalist who's written for the New York Times and has written every single one of my articles previously, and I want you to interview me on this topic. And I'll go for a walk. And it will just start to talk to me and just interview me and go, and it will ask me questions about that topic and go, oh, hang on, a while ago you wrote this article that says this and it's not quite in line with that. And I'm going, oh yeah, you're right. Well, that's, and we'll have these little debates. Now, the reason I do that, twofold. Firstly, I've got all of that information that I can then use to work on the document later on. But more importantly, it's forced me to think more deeply about the topic. That's the thing. That's the reason. Now, this one sounds really weird. Personalized tree of thought, what does that mean? Okay, so this was actually something reasonably recent, only a few months ago. I was doing some work for, it was actually Toll Group, and I was, being a consultant, go in and interview the sort of key stakeholders, etc. And I was working through this report that I needed to pull together, and I realised that in order to get this report right, I needed to have a lens on AI and business strategy, AI and leadership and culture, and AI and governance and risk. And rather than just tell sort of Claude with that that's what I'm doing, I put my headphones on and I went for a walk and got it to interview me again. But 3 times. I want you to interview me on my perspectives on AI and business strategy and what's going to happen. Then I want you to interview me on AI and leadership and culture and what's happening there and what are the patterns emerging. And then I want you to interview me on my perspectives on AI and governance and risk. And then I created 3 separate personas called Mark 1, Mark 2, and Mark 3. And then I uploaded all my notes and all my research and everything else I've been working on, and I got 3 different versions of myself to start debating how best to work on the problem. And I was helping participate. It was the weirdest thing, honestly. It's like, having a debate with 3 different versions of myself, one of which was all about growth and the other one was all about risk. And it was all really weird. But the output was really, really good. And the other thing about it is it didn't sound like an AI output, it sounded like a Mark output, because it was an extension of my thinking. I went from there, and I then went, oh, this, I quite like this. So then I actually turned this into a little app that I could share around my staff. Go, what would Mark think? So when they're working on AI strategies, they can send me they don't have to send me their first brief now. They can get some first round feedback. So there's a little bit of automation going on there. And then the other thing is just understanding where my gaps in knowledge are. So when I'm working on a problem now, again, it's something I was never able to do before, but I'm going to work on this problem for this client or something I'm doing, and I want you, AI, to ask me what I know about that and ask me questions, work out where my gaps in knowledge are, and then design a learning approach so I can fill those gaps in knowledge. Again, completely out of reach previously. Those kind of 3 techniques fundamentally changed the way that I think. So what are the 5% doing differently? Was never going to be the model. There's a lot of model blaming going on right now. People are blaming the model. Wow, ChatGPT doesn't work, let's go to Claude. And Claude doesn't work, let's go to do this. And Claude's now going to become expensive. And Copilot, blah, 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 blah. But MOT's been doing doing a lot of research on this, as of a lot of organisations, and it's not that they're buying better models or spending more on that. Those things do help, but they're doing the hard stuff. They're doing the culture stuff. They're doing the people stuff. That's where the value comes. And they're also accepting the fact that if we're asking people to learn new ways of working, there's probably going to be a productivity drop before there's a productivity gain. If you have to unlearn, therefore, those numbers that we showed you right at the beginning, where people feel like they're being really productive but actually going backwards, well, that's where they are. You're in that they're in that dip. And then once they get the model right, then you get the productivity explosion. That's what's going on. The trick is understand that's going to happen, view that as an investment, and then make it as short and shallow as possible. I think the analogy for that is, again, we were speaking about this earlier, is when the world moved from steam to electricity, there wasn't a productivity explosion immediately. There was factories were essentially designed around steam engines, so you had a steam engine, and then you had machines that went down the line. The machine that needed the most energy was right next to the engine. The one that needed the least energy was furthest away. And then when electricity came in, well, it wasn't centralised anywhere, it was decentralised energy. But there was no productivity explosion. Why? Because nobody changed the design of the factory. Now we've got the same thing going on, except our factories are knowledge factories. And it's not power, it's intelligence that's everywhere. So if we're thinking about our organisation as a knowledge factory, how do we redesign that factory when we've got intelligence everywhere? We get that right, the productivity explosion will happen. Again, another example of an organisation here, we were sort of looking at how they went through the process of being like tools last, people first, and really focusing on how they were going to sort of power AI at scale. But the thing about it is, there's lots of talk about the technology and what they did and blah blah blah. But the most interesting part about it was it fundamentally focused on the change management. It's one of the things I say often. Previously with technology is, identify the technology, get lots of technologists in, customize it, spend, roll it out, and then train everybody how to use it. So that's the change management, is training. This is different. This is we're asking people to think new ways. Change management is the strategy. There is no surprise that as an organisation develops an AI mindset and people understand how to use it and they grow confidence, that the quality and impact of AI use cases goes up in direct proportion to how that maturity is happening. Makes sense, yeah? Like, people understand what AI is and they work out where to place it to add value. But it doesn't have to be one big use case that impacts everybody. It can be lots and lots of little ones. What the leaders are doing differently is you've got really, really, really aligned leadership across the whole board. So again, it's sort of like, what are we here to do? What's our mission? It's not about, AI is not a strategy. AI is a tool to help you achieve your mission. So what are we here to do? So that direction is 100% tied to that. They start unpacking the operating model implications of that, and then they put the people at the core. Fundamentally, those are the simple things that happen. When you think about it from an operating logic standpoint, again, anchored to mission, two sides of it, which is people, which is how do we foster psychological safety, because we're asking people to go and learn and experiment and find new ways of working, which is going to improve learning velocity. People need the confidence to do that. And then we need the architecture to support them going on that journey, and the architecture need to start with context, and then you can start building out the data layers and everything else that needs to happen around that. And then the orientation fundamentally is around growth. How do we grow? How do we have greater impact? And then how does that compound in a way that is directly linked back to enterprise value and market power in some shape or form. Again, I talked about before that I do this work with YMCA, and in a few weeks I'm going over to Canada, and I'm working with, so I've become the global advisor on AI for YMCA internationally, and we have a large number of young people that we deal with. And I was asked to speak to YMCA's sort of global leadership a while ago, and I said, what do you want me to speak about? And they said, well, we want you to come in and help us understand how we can use AI to be more efficient. Not-for-profits, they're all struggling for revenue, blah, blah, blah. I went, okay. And I turned up to the event, and I said, this is what you've asked me to speak about. I'm not going to do that because it's boring. What I am going to do is I'm going to start talking about what your moral obligation is, because we deal with 60 million young people on a day-to-day basis, and they're being told that AI is essentially going to eat away their future. They're being told that they need to use it to be faster and cheaper, etc., etc. They're being taught how to use it in a way that's going to erode their ability to think critically. And the overarching narrative is this future they're not really invited to participate in. It's just going to happen to them, and they've got to accept it. I said the other option is we tell them that this technology is incredibly powerful. It is going to enable young people to explore the world around them in new and interesting ways. It's going to enable them to understand themselves in interesting ways, focus on their strengths, and develop those skills and that knowledge in a world that's going through unparalleled scientific discovery. Fundamentally, tell people, stop worrying about optimizing the past, go and create the future because we need you to. And I think that same story needs to come from leadership to the organisation. The most powerful thing in an AI rollout that a leader can be saying to the team right now is that AI is a force multiplier. The force we want multiplied is you. The thing that makes you interesting and weird and difficult and unique and all the other things is why we hired you, and we want to give you the skills and capability to be able to amplify that impact immeasurably. And the one thing, again, that 5 do, is they focus on learning velocity. How fast are we learning? AI models, that's what they do. We know this, AI models, you take lots of data, you start to get it to look at things, and it's wrong for a long time. It's wrong, and then it gets good, and then it gets really good, and then all of a sudden it's almost right, almost all the time. That's what AI models, that's what recursive learning is all about. And we harness that, and then we're getting our people to constantly be pushing the edges of it. That learning velocity just goes up and up and up. And that can translate into market power very, very quickly. Again, if you're able to learn and understand and move faster than competitors in a dynamic environment, you win. And so final thoughts of just this part. I feel like I've gone really lectury, it was really quiet. Look, I'm just going to say this, and there's been versions of this quote going on forever. It can go all the way back to Aristotle, and I think Justin Trudeau said it at the World Economic Forum in 2018. A version of this, and every single time they're right. That is the definition of compounding knowledge. Is that the pace of change is always going to be speeding up. So waiting for things to slow down is not a thing. Understanding that pace of change is going to be speeding up is the key. And that's why I say AI is fundamentally a leadership problem, because the issue is, how do you lead in that pace of change when everything is ambiguous? That is the key issue. And that's why focusing down on short-term things and blah, 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 and all these, spending lots of money, actually leads to negative outcomes. Actually bring it back up to how are we empowering our people to actually drive the business forward and create new value. That's a simple thing. And the other thing about that is that nobody in the world can keep up to the pace of change. It is impossible. We know AI is moving fast, but in about a year's time, it's not going to be 100 times more powerful than it is now. It's going to be roughly 10,000 times more powerful than it is right now. Because the AI, the tools are developing at an exponential rate, the models are developing at an exponential rate, The chips that underpin them are developing at an exponential rate, the data's going at an exponential rate, and the data centers are moving at an exponential rate. All of that together means that that pace of change is just like nobody can keep up with it. And we shouldn't try. If you even try to keep it up with it, you just get overwhelmed. And I think that's a lot of what's going on right now. You know, like the human mind is sort of hardwired when we go through periods of change to just sit there and catalog everything and go wrong, because it gives us a sense of control. But when we're going through this period of a huge amount of change, all that ends up happening is people just focus on all the problems. The only way of sort of navigating through that is to actually create something really simple that people can put their arms around and actually turn that into sort of positive momentum. I do a lot of writing about this, as I said. There's a series of white papers I've been writing. So the Chief Technology Officer of Infosys, the Head of Transformation at Woolworths, and the Head of AI at Hewlett Packard and myself have been writing this series of white papers about what is AI, what does an AI operating model and organisation look like. Feel free to grab those if you want. And yeah, that's sort of that's the talk part done. Thank you.
There's a meal coming.
Who has questions?
Or a week being questioned.
There's a lot there. Sorry, that's you. What do you think we were going to be talking about tonight? Well, yeah.
I think one of the challenges we have at the moment is, like you said, the pace of change is so rapid.
Yeah.
The expectations that's coming from the customer market plus internally.
Yep.
In judging where we want to push the gas pedal and where we want to slow it down.
Yep.
Because ultimately humans are still humans. And
Yeah, 100%.
organization can only take certain paces of change.
Yep.
And I think as a leader, that's kind of the moment we're sitting in. I think represented choose the one or two things that are going to have true business results versus 100 different things.
100% agree. Yeah.
It's the conversation that we're in quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that like focus, I think is really important. Like when you're in like, because it's sort of this explosion of intelligence and this stuff everything's possible all of a sudden, which is interesting, but it's sort of like that. When somebody goes, oh, well, you can solve this problem, or what are my constraints? You've got no constraints, it's a blank canvas, and that's the hardest thing in the world, because you've got no constraints, you've got no focus. And I think that's kind of what's going on, where it's sort of like, there's no, it's when it comes to, these kinds of transformations, it's like choose, what are the one thing you want to do differently than everybody else? I think that's the other point. It's like not just keeping up with everybody else, but what's the one thing that you can do as an organisation that will really push the value forward? There's a whole bunch of other stuff that you can sort of, do okay, but what's the one thing that's going to drive massive value and do that really, really well, and then build kind of the technology and knowledge layer around it to make that work? Absolutely agree. Yep.
What tips would you offer for getting us out of that dumb bit of the J-curve? Because right now my organisation's using it, but we're all collectively getting dumber, because all the emails are starting to sound like everybody's the same.
Yep.
Because they're all being spat out of AI. And I'm missing the glorious, crazy human stuff that you talked about that makes them all quirky and weird, and that's what I love about them, and that's where the good stuff comes from. But their emails are all starting to sound like they're all the one human. So how do I get out of that J-curve faster?
So I think one of the first things to do. Okay, so really good. So if we're talking about outcomes for an organisation, so if we just say speed is not the answer, outcome is the answer. We know that understanding the problem is a really good way. So really exploring the problem, and it is a really good way of producing a higher quality outcome. And one of the best ways to explore the problem is through diversity of thought. Now, if you're rolling out AI across your organisation, so say it's Claude, for example, and everybody's been using it for a while, they're starting to develop skills, and some of those skills will be good and bad, but what Claude is also doing is developing a skills matrix and a kind of a psychological profile of every single person in the organisation. What you can do is you can kind of create a master prompt, like a system prompt for the organisation, and say, I don't want you to rush at giving any of my people an answer. What I want you to do is I want you to help them understand who to go talk to try and explore the problem in a different way before they start working on things. So you actually start to build diversity of thought and a way of working, not because AI can, you know, as you say, it can be sycophantic and tell everybody they're a genius and they go off and do their own thing, and it's sort of crap. But actually getting people together and letting AI do the thing it needs to do, which is collect the notes and do the analysis and blah, 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 but people are having real, robust, interesting debate and collaboration, that can really help enormously. Also, in the training, you know, side of it, help people understand how to set up the AI themselves. So one of the first things I say is, you know, again, put your headphones on or whatever it is and say, you know, get it to interview you for a couple of hours and go, I want you to interview me on my life, on my perspective, how I view the world. I want you to sort of just ask me as many questions about my work life, my personal life, etc., etc., etc. And then we're going to turn that into a system prompt, and I want you to reflect that version of me in everything you do. And so then, when it's working with them, they stop outsourcing their brain to it and they start seeing a mirror. That's one way. There's a couple of ways anyway. Yeah, sure. Yeah, cool. No problem. Yeah.
One of the thoughts out there is, when you look at an organization, you'll have high performers, right?
Yeah.
Over time, high performers, let's call it, appear to be 30% more effective.
Yep.
Sort of theoretical number.
Yep.
The theory is that if those high performers actually grasp onto AI, we'll see a significant further gap in percentage of high performers versus nominal performers in the organization.
Yep.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we do a lot of, talking about high performers and AI so you get this set of high performers who are effectively, 30-40% more effective than the non-users or the people who haven't become really effective with AI, and it kind of plays out a little bit. Like you've got when we look at kind of like adoption piece of AI, before you start talking about operating model and so on, we sort of do surveys across organisations, and you get your normal distribution is roughly around that. You roughly get about roughly 10% who are the super high performers, who are going, this technology is amazing and I'm going to use it everywhere, and they're spending their own personal money on it and all sorts of stuff. But they also tend to be the high performers previously, So they were just the people who were the kind of, that's the motivated to find new ways to be better always. Then you get roughly 10% at the bottom who are like, this is the worst technology I've ever seen. It's going to turn into Skynet and kill us all. I don't want to touch it. And then you get roughly, you get that 80% in the middle that are sort of going, yeah, cool, get it, but how do we? I'm basically looking for guidance and direction. And I think the key is, within that 80%, how do you get as much of that 80% to take a few steps that way? And those super high performers can sometimes be part of the story piece, as long as they're so your change program in some way is not sort of making them idols, or to making them sort of the idea of the creative genius, blah blah blah, but they're actually going, I'm just happy to be out the front and I'm going to share my story, and they're using it as a way of building an organizational narrative. That's super powerful. Otherwise, what can happen really quickly is you get a them and us kind of culture happening, where you get a few people moving really fast and everybody else going, well, I'm not going to try and catch up.
And that's what I think that when I look into it, so it's exactly that. Let's go back 15 years, no AI involved, right?
Yep.
You have your top sort of 10 to 15% high performer, high potentials,
yep,
and they do present a high percentage of the business results.
Yep.
You've got your 80% from the bell curve, and of course you got low performers. Some of the reports that are talking about, I've never been told I had soft spoken
speak up.
before.
There's a nightclub out.
Yeah, so if you look at now that we move into the AI, if the high performers latch on to AI and actually use it effectively, and I like how you sort of connected, is that the AI is actually enhancing their abilities they have. So their curiosity, their application of knowledge and experience will go from this sort of negligible difference between a high performer and a nominal employee, and there will be a very dramatic effect is what is sort of the research is showing out there. So I guess where does that start to make an organization where it's an us versus them concept in say 5 or 6 years? This is where some of the theories come from.
I think one of the thing about the high performers inside organizations is that for whatever reason, they've discovered the thing that they're really good at early, normally. And rather than focusing in on their weaknesses, they just focus in on their strengths. It's that whole idea of, Steve Jobs was really, really good at a couple of things and really, really bad at everything else. But the things he was good at, he was exceptionally good at, and that's all he focused on. And I think, like that, spending time trying to fix the areas of you that you're not interested in is a waste of energy, but just amplifying the bits that you're good. Now, I think those high performers managed to work that out quite early, and whatever the tool, whether it's AI or anything, they use that to amplify that thing. As I said, what AI can also do is be a really, really good mirror for people. And so it can help people, if it's set up in the right way, it can help people start to understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, and help guide them and coach them to start focusing more on those strengths and stop worrying so much about those weaknesses. When I said before, metacognition is the one skill. That's kind of what I mean. Is you, quite often with particularly leadership teams, when I'm talking about AI, I say, look, we're going to help produce some AI tools or prompts and things for you, and they're not going to ever give you an answer. It's going to be really annoying for you because you're used to putting in stuff into AI and it spits out an answer. This is never going to give you an answer. All it's going to do is just ask you questions about, well, why are you thinking this way? How could you think about this in a slightly different way? Who else in the organization could think about this way? What you're talking about this problem, what part of this problem do you own? And by definition, that then starts to change their relationship that they've got with those tools, and helps people again start to think about where their strengths and their weaknesses are.
Yeah, we've got a good test case going on right now. We started with the commercial team. So, is anybody familiar with Miller-Hyman sales methodology?
Yeah.
So we use that, but that's obviously the framework. You can go back to old school Blue Sheet, Microsoft Excel. But we've actually built a lot of prompts in the first stage that goes into Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT. There's a master framework that outlines that with the company sort of dynamics. And then how does a salesperson, before hitting out, say, all right, build me an ideal customer profile scorecard based on going to this site. They have this competitive product. I'm going to position this. This is stakeholders. Here's the LinkedIn profiles of these particular people. Build me a stakeholder matrix that will identify the technical blind influences, the economic, and blah, blah, blah. Who's going to be my detractor, blah, blah, blah. And then we went on, now we're building from Cloud Code, which is an agentic AI tool to actually automate that on a daily basis according to CRM territory management plan. And that's what I was saying. We had general high performers that were very natural performers in their business, and then you had your 80% of salespeople. The people that flash on that, we have now seen this skyrocket escalation in productivity and effectiveness in their order entry already in a half year's time, compared to the people that say, I don't quite get it. So what we would gauge as nominal performance almost drops to almost low performance in compared to the high performance. So that's what we're sort of testing at the moment.
What good looks like starts to shift really quickly.
So the role design is actually becoming quite different. We're actually already shifting how do we recruit for salespeople in prompting skills testing to base on that. So there's a lot of interesting things happening.
Well, and just building on that piece, so think about role design and hiring. So this comes back to technology architecture and so on as well. Because in a year's time, for example, you're probably going to go out and you're going to recruit for some role, and you want somebody to come in and is going to facilitate some kind of change inside the organisation, and you'll do your normal recruiting process, and you'll have you'll get down to a short list. And you found this one person who's really, really, really good, and you go, we want to give you the job. And you've had this amazing career of facilitating all this change in other organisations. We want you to come and do the same stuff for us. And they go, cool. All you have to do is onboard me plus my 10 AI agents. I can't use yours because we are now a symbiotic team. And if you want that impact, you have to take my technology. Work out how to make that work. We're kind of almost at that point now.
But see, that's building on AJ's point.
Yeah.
Like, I can't see how this ends up not having major winners and losers. And you dressed it up with people first, but in reality, it's going to stratify the.
Well, yeah. I think you're right. So I think
performers and the critical thinkers and the creatives.
Yeah.
Using it to grow and to learn, to accelerate, and the rest being fed an AI tool to make them a bit better. I can't see how it doesn't really create a two-tier environment.
Yeah, well, I think in the way we currently think about organisations, you're absolutely right. I think that's absolutely going to happen. I think you're absolutely going to get this, as you say, this lift, and we get these really super high performers who become, as I said, it's a force multiplier, and their forces be able to multiply, and the more they get, the better they get at it, they're stronger that multiplication of force. But within everybody else, there are how do we identify the unique strengths of a whole bunch of other people? And that's how do we unlock the value that's sitting inside a bunch of other people? You're absolutely right. If we don't do that, it's just like a whole bunch of losers and a few winners. Yep, like that. Yeah, that's fundamentally it.
Is that down to deployment as well? Like,
what?
Maurice is saying, we're raising the ceiling, not raising the floor.
Yeah.
Is that down to deployment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, I think that's. I mean, I reckon organisational operating models are fundamentally going to have to shift. And when we start thinking about how people work and what good looks like and where that's heading, and then what role people are playing for, at a functional level, and what role they're playing in a kind of like the compound learning level, then there's a huge amount of shift that's going to happen there. Yeah. Yeah.
What would you recommend in terms of, we have different tools available, called ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Organization, for instance, is making, multiple of them available.
Yep.
But to help teams with different levels of affinity for technology to go into the AI adoption journey, it's ever changing, and right now, of course, we're targeting more on Claude, but what would you recommend, just opening up all tools and have them try for themselves?
Yeah, I think so.
Higher cost? Or?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think first of all, having a broader range, also either tools available or policy available, so there's a more broader array of tools able to be used for different reasons, and maybe it's sort of, like context is separated from the technology. And so some people go, I really like Claude and the way it works, but the context and how they're working is separated from the technology. So then if they move to something else or whatever, so you're building that context layer, that knowledge layer inside the organisation, regardless of the tool. So you're not coupled into the technology ecosystem. I think that's important, and people can then be able to use the tool they're most comfortable with, because they're kind of developing a relationship with it. So I think that's important. And I think also, trying to, as I said, trying to make the way that you talk about the tech and how people use it, try and remove as much of the technology aspect of it as possible. So you say varying levels of kind of sort of technology capability. It's really, I'm not good at technology as sort of a mental model. I'm not good at this, therefore I'm not going to try. But I'm pretty good at thinking, so I can keep doing that.
And that's the point. And I would be curious to know the experience on the table here as well, to see, we have, of course, we can make everything available for everyone, but in the long run, if people are just not using any of them, it's not effective. We can have our super users that it's good for them to have access to everything.
Yeah.
But have you had that, decision making just to say, we open up, try it, we educate them, and then still, we get those that are actually using it rather than leave it always on for everybody, or do we, shut it down if people are just not using it?
In terms of which model?
Let's say three. Let's say Claude, ChatGPT, and Copilot, which is in our organization what we have. We are opening up, access, buying accounts essentially for everybody to use. And I know some of them are going to use all three of them and understand the differences and nuances and which one will do each task better. But in my team particularly, the bulk of the team probably is not, will not go to that level of,
Yeah, it's interesting that is. I mean, it's because it's you got technology architecture inside the organization. So there's like, is it secure? Does it know everything and all that kind of stuff? So that's where the
you're all secure.
Yeah,
but yeah.
And I kind of like I had this conversation with a school. So I do a lot of work with schools and talk about education and how it needs to change and so on. And I was working with a girls' school in Melbourne a little while ago. So the board had asked me to come in and talk to them about AI and how do they use it to save money and blah blah blah. And I, came into the talk and said, like, I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff because it's the wrong question. The right question is actually how do we support your students to become empowered leaders of tomorrow in an AI-enabled world? And then I said, look. And it's not really a matter of the technology, but you understand that you're making, so the technology tools, people will use in some shape or form, and they're all roughly, they all roughly do similar things. They've got strengths and weaknesses, but they're going to converge at some point. So they're all called to pretty much do everything. But think about the position of the models behind them and the philosophical position of the organisations behind them, because that's another way of getting people involved with it when we used to talk about that. And I said, look, but as I said, it was a girls' school, and I said, so you've got Grok on one end, and you got so you got Google and OpenAI, and you got Anthropic, and I said that, and we've got the fastest growing and most ethical of the organisations happens to be Anthropic, and I don't think it's any accident that the whole leadership team, apart from the CEO, happens to be female. So, in this environment, that's probably a good message. And so there's, again, I know that gets really sort of esoteric and sort of, like, what does that all mean? And it's not sort of like super hard numbers, but the thing about this stuff, unlike any other technology wave I've been through, is that it is really philosophical. Like, people are really wrestling with what this means. They're wrestling with what it means for their own identity, what it means for society, what it means for my kids, what it means for where we're going. Like, there's all this stuff. And I think anything that you can do to help them find something to hold on to and believe in within all of that, I think actually helps enormously. No, I know it wasn't the exact answer you were looking for, but it was really.
Maybe there isn't an answer, but it's.
I just don't. I mean, like, architecturally, you could just sit here and go, well, what's the best architectural fit, and this is what it looks like, and we've got our context layer sitting over here, and we don't, we don't want to tie ourselves to any technology ecosystem and all that kind of stuff. But and those are just decisions you need to make. But I think fundamentally, the most important thing is how do you help people put their arms around it, because if you can do that, they can unlock the value. Not everybody's going to make it. I get that.
Keep it simple. If we open up too many options, then they can be overwhelmed by it.
100%.
And it's ever changing, right? Today this one's better, tomorrow that one's better, and it's also personal. Someone might have frustrations with one, give up on that curve. Whereas the other might have been better results.
Yeah, and I also think. The organisations who are getting really, really good at this, they are also the ones getting good at using like the core systems, like the ChatGPT or the Claude and the Claude Code and all that kind of stuff. Not the copilots and those kinds of things. And the only reason for that is just as I said before, like starting and ending with creating a Word doc or a PowerPoint doc and so on is no longer necessary. And so if that barrier goes down, you might need that, but if that barrier goes down and I can start creating other things and create almost any other digital asset you can imagine, then that can unlock huge value really quickly. Yeah.
You talked about the value before of humanising it.
Yep.
And it's not really the super nerds who picked up on it fast, because the interface is really, it's what you make it, right?
Yeah, 100%.
While you walk, for
Yep.
example,
Yep.
I teach Ryan to swear.
I love it. That's amazing.
You know me.
Yeah.
It sounds like me. What? So talk to me about the value of humanising it and how you can use that to make it more accessible and ideally more used by our organisations.
Yeah. Like I think so one of the prevailing issues that we've got at the moment around adoption and people becoming really good at using it and so on is this underlying feeling that it's technology versus me, basically. Is a competition going on, and AI is going to take away all the things that humans do, and we just have to sit in the sidelines and watch it happen. That prevailing message, the people who are more likely to believe that message are more likely to, or are less likely to sort of adopt the tools and get really good at it and spend time going on their own learning journey. They're more likely to be the ones that just go, they have that small productivity bump of, I write me an email and summarize this document, and that's about where they stop. Yeah. I think that the benefit of humanizing it and turning it into a kind of like, here's a thinking partner, and it's helping me, it's providing a mirror for me and helping me understand myself and helping me understand my strengths and weaknesses. And again, setting it up in a way that's not just being sycophantic, but it's doing that in a really, really like healthy way. Then that kind of me versus the technology mentality gets eroded really, really quickly. And that, again, then that becomes part of the culture. So essentially you're driving psychological safety because people want to experiment. They want to try new things. They want to share what they learned with other people. And again, almost uniformly with organisations who are getting the greatest return on investment, that's what they do.
Because they've all set these thinking up. That's what they've started with.
Yeah.
So I've got a question that I think the answer is going to be that it depends. But in my organisation, we have utility of choice. Like we could choose whatever AI we want, and we could choose multiple. It just comes down to how much we're willing to spend on it.
Yep.
I'm sure a lot of people in this room are locked into one for governance and security and other reasons.
Yep.
Do you using something for image creation, data crunching, there's various ones that have strengths and weaknesses. What you gain in having that utility of choice, do you lose in that neural network of having everything consolidated into one AI within an organisation?
That's a really good question. Actually, not necessarily.
That depends. It was very
that's why I think the architecture piece is really important. So thinking about the context layer and how that's managed and developed inside the organisation is really, really, really important. I think context layer as a capability, so context management and building out the context layer is actually a capability that kind of most organisations don't have. You've got somebody who might be looking at data and somebody's looking at document management and your knowledge management, but context for AI is a very different thing. And if the context is being developed and matured and worked on all the time, and then centralised, then the tools, as I said, become interchangeable. And you're not tied into that ecosystem, particularly as the demands from VCs for return on investment start to go up, and token prices start going up, and all those kinds of things. Yeah. Yep.
I was a big fan of ChatGPT for ages.
Yeah.
Claude became the hot thing, and I was actually nervous of building Claude because I built this persona in ChatGPT.
All the restaurants I've taken my girlfriend to,
exactly.
all these things that
I know.
So worried about money.
I know.
I decided to.
It was so weird, isn't it?
It'll be a short summary.
It's so weird. When it's like, I remember doing the same thing when I went into like ChatGPT and said, I'm moving over to Claude and I want you to create me a full thing, and I felt really guilty.
But he says, "Oh, this is a great idea." He's like, "Oh, you lied."
Yeah, I just like, and I actually read that really, really precisely. Like, what has he done in here that's going to screw me?
Maybe just a question.
Yeah.
Question. It's almost very different to what was being asked, I think, questions have been fantastic, and thank you for such a great session. I've read a little bit about AIs and all the occupation CEOs, to your point around really being able to ask critical questions, rather than go about anything. But what I've been reading more about in the press at the moment is data centres and sustainability. I'd love your perspective, because honestly, if I think about using AI, which we often do, all of us every day, there's a sense of guilt that I have.
Yeah.
I'm using it going, how much water am I using every time I ask a question, which I probably know the answer.
Well, so the good thing.
So when we think about sustainability, we think about organisations where CSR is important, and obviously we need to think about the future and the environment. How do we manage that? How do we talk about to our generation, which maybe it's not really at this table right now, coming through the organisation? Because I grapple with it. I see the efficiency, the questions, the critical thinking, but I think, hang on, Sarah, are you taking the easy way out here? What are you doing to the environment? So I'd love your perspective. Sorry to bring it down a notch, but
no, it's just cool. The question always comes up
at the moment, and it's in the press, and it's something that we're going to be asked as leaders around what is our place around efficiencies, but also sustainability.
But it's also the younger generation thinking this.
Absolutely.
My children, absolutely, retain are thinking that.
Yeah, they're thinking that. And so I'd love. Give us, and I don't want a depends question. I want an answer to the question.
Okay, I'll give you my perspective.
It's okay, we go to class.
I'll give you my perspective. Okay, so first of all, you're using a lot less water than you think. So most of the stats going around are false about how much water is actually being used. Energy, a little bit less so. They are using a lot of energy, but that's just the scale of them. So the Australian Public Service have done a really good job of that with their organisation. So what they did is they rolled out kind of like, custom version of ChatGPT with all the security stuff that government needs, and then said, look, these tools can be quite, consume quite a lot of energy. Maybe don't create cat videos, like help people understand what sensible use look like. Also told people, like if you're working inside these tools, try and stay in the tool for as long as possible before you spit out a PowerPoint document or something like that. Because as soon as you create a PowerPoint document and you start editing it, it's rebuilding it every single time, which is just churning through tokens, like churning through energy and compute really, really fast. So it's a really inefficient way of working, even though it just does it for you. So those kinds of things, just helping people understand what stuff drives more energy consumption, is just making people aware helps. The other point around it is it's kind of that J-curve thing that I was talking about before. So the problem we're talking about when we're talking about the environmental impact is not that AI has created the environmental issue. It's that the environmental issue was there and it's now contributing to it. The environmental issue before AI was a problem that was continuing to scale, and everybody was aware of it, and everybody was debating, etc. But fundamentally, that's where we're heading. Huge problem that we know we needed to solve, and reasonably confident that if everybody in the world came together and started focusing on it, we might get somewhere eventually. But will we get there in time? Maybe, and this is just my perspective on it, maybe an explosion in intelligence is the thing that we need to find the solution to the problem. If we ever want to find if we ever want to get, nuclear fusion and actually use that as clean energy everywhere around the world, we probably need massive amounts of intelligence directed towards that very, very quickly. Is it guaranteed? No. But what is guaranteed, if we don't do it, that trajectory that we're on will just keep going. So maybe it's the mess before the answer. Maybe.
Say it depends.
What's that?
What? You didn't say it depends.
Yeah.
So
I said maybe.
I'll give you a B. I don't know.
So Mark, while you're down this end, you spoke about getting your teams, people at organisations, everyone's jumping in and giving it a go. where or how is that consolidated within the organisation so that you're extracting whatever it is that these people are producing?
Yes. So again, that's where your architecture becomes really super important. It's the difference between creating stable patterns. So stable patterns are repeatable things that just create efficiency, and unstable patterns is where IP is generated, basically. It's where value is created. And so your architecture of understanding how to identify those sort of unstable patterns, and essentially humans are unstable patterns. That's what they are. We're messy, weird things. And so that so the architecture be able to identify that, understand where that fits within the context of the organisation, and then bake that back into the context layer and share it as quickly across the parts of the organisation that needs to get access to it as possible. That becomes kind of like what orchestration, so intelligent orchestration inside the organisation actually starts to look like. It stops becoming about individual workflows, and it's actually about new value, new ideas, new IP being created, standardised into the business and shared with those who need it as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So, you probably lost me a little bit, but if everyone's using Copilot within the business, which is it already being stored or captured in some way and learning from that independently of us so implementing some kind of rules or structure or extraction?
No offence to any of the technology businesses, but every single one of them wants to keep you stuck in their ecosystem as long as possible. Okay, that's their business model. Okay? So their business model is keep you in the ecosystem, all the data's there, it's impossible to come out, we can keep ramping prices up. That's why I said architecturally, you have to design where the context layer of the organisation sits, and you decouple it from the tools themselves. You have to do that, because you're at massive risk if you don't. That's like at its simplest level. You just have to. You have to do that. And then you can get the architect to work.
I'm just thinking about a guy in a warehouse thinking, mate, he just has to do a task. I don't need an entrepreneur. I don't need a guy trying to do anything differently. But in my marketing team and maybe in pricing and
sure.
analysis, they need to go big on this.
Yeah, and the guys do the tasks, as I said, the stable pattern stuff. Like they just need to do things really fast and really quickly. Finding a bit of getting a bit of intelligence, a bit of automation around that. It helps it, makes it faster, etc., etc., etc. It's great. But again, as you say, then you've got the other people who are unlocking new value. They might think of something that makes that person's job way easier. Great. How do we standardise that as rapidly as possible without being tied into a technology ecosystem? Unfortunately, it's always, until you start working on the architecture, it's always going to be a question, not an answer.
Yeah.
So can you ask the AI how to set me up in your business so I'm not coupled?
You can, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could absolutely.
There you go.
And I can do it, and to have it explain it to you like you're 12-year-old.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you absolutely can. And if it's got enough context of the organisation, it will do it really, really well. And it will, it can act as a team of enterprise architects and go and do all that kind of stuff and help you. It won't be perfect. And again, remember, it's historical. So if this hasn't been done in your kind of organisation before, it won't really know how to do it. It will do its best guess, but you will need people, you'll need experts to come in and think through what that actually means. Yeah.
Are there AI solutions that are segmenting to certain industries, or are they trying to be broad?
No, I mean so the models themselves are general purpose, but then of course you can customize those models for certain industries, and then of course people are building AI tools for specific use cases within certain industries. And obviously there's a lot that's happening in the medical space and those kinds of things. But yeah, lots of different industries are doing those kinds of things. But for a lot of those individual specialised use cases, you probably don't need general sort of general purpose intelligence. You need specific. So a large language model like a ChatGPT or a Claude that has some specific training is probably inefficient. Like a small language model that's only focused on that one particular industry sector, and just is really, really effective on that is probably a much cheaper way of going.
Isn't that Anthropic that basically said it's starting to feel now as well? It's starting to have emotion?
Yeah. Well, it's at least
tell itself that?
It's at least synthesizing emotions and so on. I saw something recently where with Fable, so the new Anthropic one.
You got shut down briefly, didn't it?
Well, it got shut down because of security concerns. But another thing, because it was back up and running today, and somebody was using it, and they were trying to work on a bug, and then they abused it, and they said, "Well, I told you this previously. I'm going to end this conversation now," and it just went ended. It just went, "Nah, I'm out." now
HR for our AI.
What's that?
Now we need HR for our AI.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing about that is that it isn't actually feeling and doing these things, but Anthropic have built that into what they call the constitution. And so they've given a set of rules and ways of thinking and ways of behaving, and I think what they're trying to do is help train people to kind of be respectable to AI, because then they've probably got the data to show that produces better outcomes, I would imagine. And if you ever do get a chance, there's quite a few interviews with the chief philosopher at Anthropic. It's a person who wrote what they call the Constitution, the soul doc of Anthropic, which is basically it's how to operate in a way that is aligned to humanity and all this sort of. Super interesting to listen to her talk, and the reason why these AI labs are hiring philosophers really, really fast and paying them huge amounts of money, because they're trying to create these, work through all these weird ethical issues and all those kinds of things, that's never happened in technology before. Ethics, philosophy, technology, they've never really been in the same sentence before.
But there's also a paper coming out about how basically our manners are actually more improved when we use AI because of how responsive they interact with us versus some humans. We're like the amount of thank yous and your welcomes that come through AI. In fact, the data usage globally on saying thank you and getting a welcome back is astronomical now. But it's saying that here is person A, that in their normal life, their interaction with another human being can maybe be very brief and very monotone, and there's not exactly a manners back and forth. But because the engagement and conversation we get with AI, we actually tell it, thank you, ChatGPT. Yeah. We don't say that in real life to other humans. So they're actually seeing this uptick on our manners and engagement with AI versus normal humans.
Which is actually not a bad thing.
British.
Yeah.
I remember a while ago when you talk about manners. There was an interview that Sam Altman did ages ago where he said, don't say thank you to it because it's wasting a whole bunch of energy, which is crap. It was absolute bullshit. When you actually did the numbers, it was nonsense. But the other point around it is the fact that people are saying please and thank you is actually not a bad thing, because they're, it's recursive learning. So they're looking for, is it good or is it bad? So if you say thank you, that was good, it registers that as, that is a pattern that I need to understand and learn from. And so you're reinforcing a certain way of operating by saying, saying thank you. Please, less so. But again, just, as I said, remember that is, reinforcement learning is what they're about. So, saying that was an awesome job, well done, not a bad thing.
Is the opposite true as well?
Yeah.
If you treat it poorly when it gives you, in your mind, a poor output?
I think it's better if it's constructive feedback. I mean, it's exactly the same way as a person. If you go, hey, that wasn't very good, what can you improve next time, as opposed to you're an idiot, you're going to get a different response.
Yeah, don't call me an idiot. That's what I do, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's they're getting increasingly good at synthesizing what a human relationship looks like, And as I said, they're starting to develop really deep understanding about who you are. As I said, those, I mean, I'm sure Claude understands a whole lot about me because I've spent a lot of time telling it about myself, so I'm kind of afraid to ask now.
Why did you choose Claude?
Well, I use them all for different reasons, but Claude's kind of my number one go-to now. I just like its style, the way of working. I mean, obviously, that whole thing with the American military and so on. I think just the way they sort of talk about, their mission as an organisation, how much they focus on the culture inside the business, the fact that they've spent a lot of time hiring intellectuals from a whole bunch of different fields, like, as I said, creativity and philosophy and a whole range of different aspects that have literally nothing to do with AI. The fact they've gone and hired thousands and thousands of not-for-profit specialists who are going to go out and basically, help not-for-profits to be able to adopt this technology and be able to, all that kind of stuff. They don't have to do any of that. And I think it's pretty cool.
And 10 years ago, the less social skills, the better you were in tech, right? It's like, we're going to put 20 of you in a room, dark, don't talk to each other.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're going to have better output, and now the sort of the opposite is.
But it's really interesting. So MIT did a study a while ago called and it was called the EPOC report. I forget what EPOC stood for, but it was like all the different human behaviours, and it was showing that what happens inside organisation as you go up the maturity curve. And so all the different functions, so sales, marketing, etc., etc., etc. And to your point, the human pieces, so creativity and collaborating and coming together and talking and debating and all that, like that work goes up, like significantly goes up in organisations that go through that maturity curve, and then a whole bunch of that other work goes away. So the shape of work changes quite significantly, and those soft skills, as you say, become increasingly important. So, thoughts, feedback? It's a big weird world, isn't it? I know. And it's really, really annoying, I find. It can be really annoying where it's just like, how do we just adopt this technology and just make things better? And what's the easiest path? And it's like, and then the more you pick at it, the more you work on it, you realise it's like, it's actually going to be really hard.
It's like you have
unfortunately.
Opinion every week.
What's that?
It's like you have a different opinion every week.
Yeah.
I've updated every day.
And all the things that, like, people are hard, and maybe AI can replace people to make business simpler, and then you actually realise, well, that actually reduces value, and so we have to spend more time on people, which is even harder, so all of that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, as I said, it's the technology in and of itself kind of is not going to do much. I mean, AI agents obviously do things independently over time, but most AI tools are sitting there dormant unless somebody says something to them. That's why they've got no sense of time. So yeah. But as I said, those organisations in that top 5%, like, huge productivity improvement. And most of the time, not because they're aiming for it, almost because it's a great side product, or side, almost like bycatch, really, I suppose, of just aiming for something bigger. They aim for growth, they aim for impact, they aim for kind of like, how can we do more to execute on our organisation mission? And then all those other benefits, those productivity improvements and all those other benefits sort of just happen along the way. And the more you sort of focus on those short-term things, the more elusive they become, unfortunately. Well, thanks for the evening, guys. Really good conversations. And I know there's a lot there really quickly. And I'm well known for saying well, these kinds of things. I know everybody wants the answers, and I'm not going to give them to you. Tough luck. I often stand up and before these things and say, well, you've asked me to talk about all these things, and instead I'm going to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. Thanks a lot for tonight, and really, really good questions.
Thank you. Yeah, now you can have your starter. Thank you so much, Mark. That was great. Did people feel like they kind of got some of their questions answered, or not at all? I think it actually is almost not at all. But when I think about some of the things we've talked in the collab calls about bringing people along the journey and why it's not happening, I feel like some of this is exactly what it is, and the thinking partner piece. Is anyone already doing this? Is anyone already doing this with their teams where...
It sounds like you are, yeah.
You are, yeah. And you've already said, like creating those where you're almost saying, get it to interview me, get it to make me think more, rather than, I want to do this and it spits it out.
We're trying to... I've got a view that's different. I love a presentation that reaffirms my bias, so I really enjoyed that. But we're trying to steer away from using AI for subjective and then going only objective. Because we did this exercise, we had 6 people in the room, we used ChatGPT, so maybe that was the problem, but we asked it about the war in the Middle East. 6 different people, 6 different backgrounds, 6 questions, 6 completely different answers. And I wonder why your comment around the technology company wants you on the platform. It's like Facebook, it wants to keep you there. So it'll engage you in a way that wants to keep you there. Maybe it'll tell you. So the subjective piece I find is leading people down a path that may give you good ideation, but may not lead you in the path you necessarily want to. So we're trying to steer it back. It doesn't matter the platform, but the question's got to be objective and an objective measure. And we found really good value in that.
So what do you mean by objective?
So for example, you use it for if you want to assess the market size, because that's objective information. Because what it doesn't do is it doesn't ideate problem. AI doesn't wake up in the morning and go, hey, you've got a problem, you should look at this. And what it does do, if you ask it, it'll look for the information to try to draw a conclusion. To your point, it looks at things in past history, as opposed to, I guess, AGI, which is trying to think. But so we'll only ask the things where it can pull data sets that numericals really good. I found that really useful. Assessing analytical stats is really useful. Giving you multiple conclusions so you can kind of decide, because I think we've all got examples where someone will send you an email and it's written by AI and they haven't given it any critical thought, and you immediately look and go, that's wrong. But to pull the information, because it becomes too philosophical in its use, like they've asked it a question about behaviour, and behaviour is based off your behaviour is different to my behaviour or what it may be, so they want you, Maurice, to see it a certain way versus me, and the more you do it, the more it will train itself to do it to keep you on the platform. And so we've seen that, and I've seen people that have used AI the most for more philosophical, behavioural-based questions to go down paths that can be fundamentally way off track for where we think we're heading, because it keeps them on that platform.
Is that, in those situations, is it people that didn't really know the topic well to begin with?
I'm not going to
You could argue that, yeah. Maybe they didn't know the topic well enough, yeah. And so the questions they ask are reaffirming what they want to hear, or maybe what their bias is, and so you create tension in the discussion unnecessarily. So I've just found it really interesting where people, because what it does is it compresses ideation to conclusion, right? It doesn't come up with the problem, it doesn't tell you the answer necessarily, it'll give you suggestions or information that's readily available, so it compresses it, so everyone can ask a lot of questions really quickly. And then so you jump to a conclusion really quickly, because that's what humans do. If it's data driven, typically you end up in a similar spot, more or less. I've just found where it's something more behavioural or a bias to a way I want something to be, it can be very divergent. And then you get this real kind of discussion that's really hard to get back on track because they've got themselves down a path.
One suggestion for that, and it's powerful in multiple different ways. is if you bring the leadership team together. Remember I said so Anthropic's got this thing called the soul document? So it's basically the system prompt, so it's like an overarching prompt for how Claude is going to behave for everybody in the world. If you've rolled out these tools for your organisation, as a leadership team, if you come together and go, we need to create the same kind of document, okay? So imagine that you've gone up the level of sophistication, you've got AI tools, you've got AI agents, you're handing over increasing levels of decisioning to them, and then your kind of operating model starting to shift. So you sort of imagine that in the future, and then you say, how do we want these tools to behave in a way that is most aligned to the interests of our organisation, to our people, and to the community we serve? And then start thinking through all the ethical issues that might come out of it. It'll be a long document. The great thing about that is you end up getting really, really well aligned leadership views, because you have to have the philosophical discussions. But that document can actually be used exactly in that way. Yep. So the things you're talking about, like that, these are the kinds of outcomes that we don't appreciate inside this organisation. It can actually sit above that as a context thing that every single system looks at and goes, right, I need to bake that into my overarching behaviour before I engage with anybody.
Which is a useful idea, which we haven't done. Yeah, that's fair.
This is some of what Paul was driving as well, is like if you learn to use these tools, the training's in how to write the prompts.
Yeah.
Really, the better you can write prompts, the better your output. And so is that like part of the issue in some of these subjective areas?
It is. I mean, the thing about having multiple tools. Do you know what's really good at writing prompts for Claude? ChatGPT. And vice versa. And yes, prompting is a way of thinking, but also, because these things because it's plain language, the other way of thinking about it is almost like it's sort of governance and what are the laws, what are the rules, what are the overarching things that we want to put in place that determine how this organic system, the society, is going to function. Yeah.
I was interested, Paul, is the issue that you're asking an objective or a subjective question, or is it that everyone's taking the answer as an objective answer? As in, like if it's all unique to that person and how they ask questions, and then they're giving more power to an answer that it's given them they wouldn't have had as their own personality.
So I think, from what I've seen, and so I think that's a really valid point, I think governance in terms of the way you want the program to think across your organisation with a set of principles, we haven't done that. So that's reasonable. I think that's a great idea. We do favour different programs for different things because it's just governance because of organisation. But where we've used objective data sets, so whether it's procedural numbers, whether it's trends, whether it's global things, and you end up in the same place regardless of who asks it, how experienced they are on the AI tool or not, and how they ask the question. You kind of get similar answers. When it becomes about something that's a belief system or whatever it may be, it starts to vary.
Yeah.
And maybe because, to your example, we haven't done that overarching principle and guiding in terms of how we want to think. So, for example, we haven't told it always put the patient everything you think of, make sure it's always about Australian use of the system, whatever it may be. We haven't done that, so it drifts and people dig. And I think it's just human behaviour because it keeps you on the platform, and then it's like, you will get it right. It says, are you happy with your answer? And they ask you another question to ask it another question. And you keep digging. And I've just found when it becomes a belief-based, subjective thing, you can have two people in the room that typically would disagree about something anyway, become even more divergent. Because you're taking them down a path. And you're like, how did you get there?
I think that government, like that, having it in your ecosystem.
The governance that we have.
Otherwise, you're using the magic of
Yeah,
otherwise, if you're just using it objectively, everyone's got the same information.
Well, and that's
that's
exactly right. I mean, I suppose that's like well-designed AI governance. Is again, it's the way you think about the whole organisation as an organic system. Because without that, it's basically, even though you've got a company license, it's a whole bunch of individuals using AI individually. So it's really messy.
Yes.
And it's going to help them reinforce their own perspectives and so on over and over again, and I think, it's the other point of thinking well-designed governance is not a whole bunch of no's. It's about yes, but how to do it safely at scale.
Yeah.
But yes, I can imagine, I can see exactly that scenario playing out as you're talking. I can just see that just going off in a bizarre direction very, very quickly.
How did you come up with that as a test case?
In terms of
putting 4 or 6 people in a room and having that as a subject matter?
how did I come up with that as a test case? So it was.
Did you ask Chad?
You really want to know? How can I prove this thing doesn't work? No. No, how did I come up with it? So I learned it through, my brother who runs a big bank in the US, I was chatting to him about it, and we had this big argument at Christmas around AI after too many drinks. But, and he was obviously very pro, and he suggested things, and he runs Link Logistics, which clearly knows is owned by Blackstone, huge firm. And he had this, and he said, you got to be careful with it. Came up with thing. He said, so we in the US, in his firm, and he's Australian, he said his leadership team were all various backgrounds. He said that they went and asked it about the US's view on Israel-Palestine relationship, right? And the answers it gave was very different, right, depending on your background. But you had to ask the same 6 questions. So we did it with the leadership team, and unfortunately, my leadership teams vary, gender, backgrounds, where they're from, and so we did it on the Middle East, and did similar questions, and it got to a very different answer based off the background. Now, some people, it was the first time they had ever used ChatGPT, so they knew nothing about that individual, and others had used it extensively. But it got to a very different position in the end. And so the point of doing that exercise was it was a subjective belief. Like it was a subjective question we were asking from the outset, and it became subjective all the way along. So then we moved to a model which was, if the first question you're asking AI is an objective thing for work, like it's using for an objective purpose, then go forward, like it's about that.
Yeah.
And I've just found it being more useful than that. But to your point, we put no overarching governance framework about how we wanted to think and behave because of our organisational values, which is I think a really good idea. I haven't thought of doing that. So.
How do you go about doing that?
So as I said, like you can do that in a series of workshops with the leadership team. I helped one of my clients do it, and I didn't do it. I brought in a philosopher actually, again, to guide them through the process. And a psychologist. I probably thought, we might need somebody to make sure they don't crap the bed here. But I won't tell you why. It's just sort of unpacking the questions around that. So again, start with a scenario. Imagine you're in a few years in advance, and then, okay, we've got this. We go handing over more control and more power. Our people are getting much more sophisticated. The impact and the way it's getting tied in, etc., etc. How do we want these things to behave? And what is alignment? What is behaviour that's aligned with the interests of our organisation and our people and our customers or community we serve? What does that mean? What does that look like? What are the values of the organisation? And then it tries to become a single, it becomes a single document. It ends up being quite long. And you have to sort of go, well, when is it okay to break a rule? For example, like, I think, so Anthropic has had this really interesting case where they've said, they basically said never lie, but but if it's a small kid asking if Santa Claus is real, then you're kind of allowed to bend the truth, So when is it more ethical to avoid the truth than those that kind of stuff, which is really, again, super interesting stuff to unpack. Because most of the time when you do that stuff with mission, vision, values, and our values are these 4 bullet points, and everything's going to be normal, but like actually unpacking that and what that really means.
Life's in the ground, right?
Yeah. That can be one approach, definitely. And as you said, I think that the benefit of doing it that way is the leadership team usually comes out of it much more aligned about what this means and where we're heading and why than they walked into it. Yeah.